Lease agreement was sitting open on my laptop when my phone rang. It was my mother, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that she sounded almost apologetic before she even said hello. "Your uncle called," she said. "He wants you at Thanksgiving this year. He says it's important. He says the whole family needs to be there." I closed my laptop slowly. My uncle hadn't spoken to me directly in almost 3 years. Not since I told him I was leaving my position at the accounting firm to run my real estate business full-time. He'd looked at me the way you look at someone who just announced they're moving to the woods to live off the land. Pity, mixed with something sharper. Something that looked a lot like contempt. "Did he say why?" I asked. My mother paused. "He has an announcement about Nathan." I set my phone down on the counter and stared at the ceiling for a moment. Nathan. My cousin Nathan, who had been held up as the family standard since we were 12 years old. Nathan, who had a finance degree from a school my uncle mentioned in every conversation possible. Nathan, who had spent the last 4 years climbing the ladder at a wealth management firm in Chicago, while I had spent those same 4 years buying distressed properties, renovating them, and leasing them back out, quietly, without fanfare, without anyone in my family really understanding what I was doing or why. "I'll be there," I said. "Let me back up, because the story of that Thanksgiving actually starts about 6 months earlier, on a Tuesday morning when I was walking through a vacant duplex in a neighborhood that most people in my family would have called a bad investment. I had grown up in a house where success looked a specific way. It had a title. It had a benefits package. It wore a blazer to work and came home at 6 and talked about the market over dinner like the market was a person everyone knew personally. My uncle, my father's older brother, had built his entire identity around that version of success. He was a senior partner at an insurance company. He drove a car that he mentioned the make and model of whenever possible. He had a son who was, by every metric he recognized, doing exactly what a person was supposed to do. I had not done what a person was supposed to do. I'd gotten my accounting degree, worked 18 months at a firm downtown, and then handed in my notice on a Thursday afternoon when I realized I was going to spend the rest of my working life being careful about other people's money instead of building something of my own. I had saved enough to put a down payment on a small rental property in a transitional neighborhood, one of those areas that real estate people call up and coming and everyone else calls a gamble. I lived in one unit. I rented the other. I used the rent to fund the next purchase. It was slow at first, unglamorous. I drove a car that had 140,000 miles on it. I wore the same winter coat for 4 years. I spent my weekends learning how to patch drywall and replace water heaters and read a property's bones before I ever made an offer. My uncle found out what I was doing at Easter of that year, 3 years before the Thanksgiving I'm about to tell you about. He'd asked what I was up to, and I'd explained briefly, and he'd nodded the way people nod when they've already decided the answer is wrong. "Real estate," he said. "So you're a landlord." He said the word the way you say it when you want someone to understand that you think it's small. I told him yes, essentially, that was right. He'd looked across the table at Nathan, who had just been promoted to associate analyst, and smiled. "Nathan's firm manages over $4 billion in assets," he said, to no one in particular. I ate my ham and said nothing. That became the pattern for the next 3 years. I showed up to family events. I answered questions briefly. I did not explain myself or defend my choices or try to make my uncle understand what I was building, because I had come to understand, slowly and then all at once, that he did not actually want to understand. He wanted a ranking. He wanted to look around a table and know where everyone fell. And he had already decided where I fell, and nothing I said was going to move me in his estimation until something external forced the issue. So I stopped trying and started working. By the time my mother called me about Thanksgiving, I had 14 properties across 3 counties. I had a property manager who handled day-to-day operations. I had a small LLC that owned the portfolio and a separate holding company that I used for acquisitions. My name wasn't on a single sign or website. I had never seen the point of advertising because my tenants came through referrals and my deals came through relationships, and I had always been more comfortable being the person in the room that no one had fully accounted for. I wasn't rich, exactly, but I was comfortable in a way that was real, not performed. I owned things. I had built something that would outlast a job title. I drove to my mother's house the Wednesday before Thanksgiving and helped her set up the folding tables in the living room the way we always did. My mother had never made me feel small about my choices. She was the kind of woman who asked real questions and listened to the answers. And when I'd left the accounting firm, she'd said, "I hope you know what you're doing," in a tone that meant she thought I probably did. "Is Nathan bringing someone?" I asked, because I was trying to understand what kind of event I was walking into. "His girlfriend," my mother said, "and your uncle has been talking about something for weeks. I don't know what it is, but he's been very pleased with himself." That was not a good sign. Thanksgiving started the way Thanksgiving always started. Coats piled on my mother's bed, the smell of butter and sage from the kitchen. Cousins I only saw twice a year asking each other what they'd been up to. My uncle arrived at noon with my aunt, Nathan, and Nathan's girlfriend, a woman named Priya who seemed genuinely nice and slightly bewildered by the volume of the room. For the first hour, things were normal. Then my uncle got his second glass of wine and the afternoon shifted. It started with the usual questions, the kind that aren't really questions so much as calibration tools, designed to establish where everyone stands so the conversation can proceed accordingly. My cousin Marcus had just gotten a job at a hospital network in Dallas. My uncle approved. My other cousin had finished a second master's degree. My uncle nodded seriously, like someone evaluating a pitch. Then he turned to me. "So," he said, "still doing the rental thing?" I said yes, still doing the rental thing. "How many units?" "Enough," I said. He smiled, the smile of a man who found the answer satisfying for the wrong reasons. "You know, there's something to be said for steady income. Not everyone's built for corporate life." He said it like a consolation, like he was giving me something. Across the table, Nathan was being very quiet, which I would later understand to mean he already knew what his father was about to do. My uncle set down his glass and looked around the room the way people look around a room when they want everyone's attention, without appearing to demand it. "I want to say something," he said, "about Nathan, because we have something to celebrate." The table shifted its attention. My aunt was already smiling the particular smile of someone who has been told the punchline in advance. "Nathan has been offered a position," my uncle said. "Senior portfolio manager at Meridian Capital. Overseeing a book of about $600 million in assets. He starts in January." There was a round of genuine congratulations. Priya squeezed Nathan's hand. My mother said that was wonderful. It was wonderful. I had no issue with Nathan. Nathan had never been unkind to me. This was his father's theater, not his. But my uncle wasn't done. "I want to say something else," he said, and his voice had taken on the careful weight of a person who has rehearsed this. "I know we have a lot of different people around this table doing a lot of different things, and I respect everyone's choices." He paused in the way that makes clear the pause is not respectful. "But there is something to be said for building a real career, for showing up every day, earning the trust of an institution, working your way up properly. Not everyone takes that path. And sometimes you look around and you wonder." He stopped and looked at me briefly enough that he could claim later he hadn't. "You just wonder." The table was quiet in the specific way that means everyone heard exactly what was said and no one is going to acknowledge it directly. I felt something rise in my chest. Not anger, exactly. It was more like recognition, the feeling of watching something click into place. I had been waiting without realizing it for a moment exactly like this one, and now that it had arrived I felt almost calm. I picked up my water glass and took a sip and said nothing. My uncle moved on. He talked about Nathan's firm, about Chicago, about how Nathan had earned every bit of this through discipline and focus and doing things the right way. He used the phrase "the right way" 3 times. I counted. Dinner happened. The turkey was good. The conversation moved around me, and I sat inside it and let it move, the way you sit inside weather. It was after dinner, in that loose hour when people are standing with coffee cups and the kids are watching something in the other room, that my uncle came to stand beside me near the kitchen doorway. "I didn't mean anything pointed by that," he said, which meant he had. "I know," I said. I just think you have potential, he said. You always have. You're smart. It's not too late to get back into something structured. I know people. I could make a call. I looked at him for a moment. He was sincere in his way. He genuinely believed what he was offering me was valuable. He had no framework for understanding what I had built, so in his mind, I hadn't built anything. I was still the niece who left a good job to collect rent checks. I appreciate that, I said, and I did a little. I just didn't need it. The conversation moved on. I drove home that night and sat in my kitchen for a while looking at nothing in particular, and I thought about whether it mattered, whether any of it mattered, and decided that it didn't. Except in the small personal way that things always matter when someone you grew up with treats you like you never quite arrived. I forgot about it mostly. That's the thing about being underestimated for long enough. Eventually, you stop feeling the need to correct people because you know the record will correct itself. You just have to be patient and let the work do what the work does. It corrected itself on a Tuesday in February. I was in the middle of a site walk on a mixed-use building I was considering, a 3-story property that needed a new roof and significant interior work, but sat on a corner lot in a neighborhood that had just had 2 new coffee shops open within 4 blocks. Which I had learned over years of doing this was more predictive than any spreadsheet. My phone buzzed. It was my property manager, Terrence, and his message said, "Call me when you're done. Not urgent, but interesting." I called him from the parking lot of the building. "So," Terrence said, "you know the Meridian Capital lease?" I did know it. About 8 months earlier, my holding company had acquired a commercial property in the River North area of Chicago. A mid-size office building that I'd gotten at a favorable price because the previous owner needed a clean exit quickly. I'd spent 4 months on renovations and then leased several floors to various tenants, one of which was a regional office of a wealth management firm. The lease had been handled through a commercial broker on both sides, which was standard, and I had reviewed and signed all the documentation in my legal name, which was not a name my uncle knew to look for, because my holding company was registered under a variation of my middle name that I'd chosen specifically to keep business and personal life separate. "What about it?" I said. "New tenant contact just filled out the emergency maintenance portal," Terrence said. Gave his name as Nathan, and he said my cousin's last name. He listed his title as Senior Portfolio Manager. I stood in that parking lot for a long moment. Nathan had taken the job at Meridian Capital. The regional office that Meridian Capital had recently expanded into was on the 4th floor of a building that I owned. "Okay," I said. "You knew?" Terrence asked. "Not exactly," I said, "but I'm not surprised." I drove home and sat at my kitchen table and felt something I'm not sure I can name precisely. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't satisfaction, exactly. Though there was an element of that. It was more like completion. Like a sentence that had been sitting unfinished for 3 years had quietly, without drama, found its period. I did not call my uncle. I did not call my mother. I did not do anything at all for a week, except think about whether and how to handle what I now knew. What I decided was this: I would do nothing. I would let the lease proceed normally. Nathan would show up to work in a building I owned without knowing I owned it, and that would be true for exactly as long as it needed to be true, and eventually something would make it relevant, and at that point I would let it be relevant without engineering anything. I didn't have to wait long. My uncle has a habit, which I should have anticipated, of using family group texts as an extension of his personal press office. 3 weeks after Nathan started at Meridian, a message appeared in the family thread with a photo attached. Nathan at his new desk, downtown Chicago visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. "So proud," my uncle wrote. 600 million in assets under management. This is what dedication looks like. Hard work, right path, right results. Some lessons are worth learning early. He sent it to 14 family members, including me. I looked at the photo for a long time. Those were very nice windows. I had paid quite a bit to have them replaced. I typed nothing and put my phone away. The group text kept going for a while. Various relatives responded with fire emojis and congratulations. Someone asked if Nathan had gotten the corner office yet. My uncle said he was working on it. Then my aunt, who has always been warmer than her husband and possibly suspects more than she lets on, sent a message directly to me, not in the thread, but privately. "How are you doing, sweetheart? What are you working on these days?" I thought about it for a while. Then I typed back, "I'm good. Actually, I just renewed a commercial lease on one of my Chicago properties. Good tenant. Things are going well." She sent back a heart. She probably didn't understand the significance. That was fine. 2 months later, my uncle called me directly, which he rarely did. "I need to ask you something," he said, and his voice had a particular quality that I recognized as the voice of a man who had recently had information rearranged in a way he didn't expect. "Sure," I said. "Nathan mentioned something to me," he said slowly, "about his office building. He looked up the property records. He's been having some issues with the HVAC, and someone told him to contact the building owner directly if the management company wasn't responding fast enough. HVAC issues. Terrence had mentioned the fourth-floor unit had been running cold. He pulled the ownership records," my uncle continued, "and ran the holding company name. And then he did some more digging." A long pause. "Is that your building?" I was quiet for a moment. Not for dramatic effect, though I understand it might have seemed that way. I was quiet because I was genuinely deciding how to have this conversation. "Yes," I said. "It is." The silence on the other end of the line was the most complete silence I have ever heard from my uncle, who is not a man who defaults to silence. "How many buildings do you have?" he finally asked, in a different voice than he had ever used with me before. "In Chicago or total?" I said. Another silence. "Total," he said. I told him the number. I told him the rough valuation of the portfolio, which had grown considerably in the 8 months since the Meridian lease had closed, partly because 2 of my properties in a different market had appreciated significantly and I'd refinanced to pull equity and acquire 2 additional buildings. I told him about the holding company and the management company and the LLC structure, none of which he had known about because none of which I had ever explained to him because he had never asked. He was quiet for so long, I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked. "You didn't ask," I said. "And then because I am human, also you told the whole family that some lessons are worth learning early." A very long pause. "I said that about Nathan." "I know," I said. He was quiet again. "Then I didn't realize." "I know," I said again, "and here is the part that I think about the most, the part I've turned over more times than any of the rest of it." He apologized. Not a big, performed apology, a small, tight, real one. He said he hadn't understood and he'd made assumptions and he was sorry for how he'd spoken at Thanksgiving, meaning the thing he hadn't directly admitted to saying, but had said nonetheless. I told him I appreciated it, and I did, a little. I also told him that Nathan was a good tenant, and I had no plans to change that, which made him exhale in a way that told me that had been the actual source of the phone call's urgency. "I didn't think you would," I said, "but I wanted you to know it's fine." I don't know what he told the rest of the family. I don't know if Nathan knows the full picture yet. We've exchanged a couple of professional emails through Terrence's system, and if Nathan's made the connection, he hasn't brought it up directly, which I respect. He got the job on his own. The building being mine was not something he had any hand in, and I have never once used it as leverage, nor would I. My mother figured it out around May when she came to visit me and saw the spreadsheets I'd left open on my kitchen table. She sat down, looked at them for a while, and then looked up at me. "Is this yours?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is the building Nathan works in on here?" "3rd row," I said. She laughed. It was a short, surprised laugh, the kind that escapes before you've decided whether you're going to laugh. "Did you know when you went to Thanksgiving?" she asked. "No," I said. "That was February." She nodded and looked at the spreadsheet a while longer. "You never said a word," she said. "There wasn't anything to say," I said. "It was just business." She gave me a look that I have been receiving from my mother for 31 years. The one that means she knows I'm telling the truth and not the whole truth simultaneously. How long have you been building this? She asked. 5 years, I said. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine for a moment, the way she used to when I was small and had done something that scared me and come out on the other side of it okay. I always knew you knew what you were doing, she said, and that, more than any spreadsheet, more than any square footage or cap rate or lease agreement, that is the thing I will remember from all of it. Not the phone call with my uncle, not the moment Terence read me Nathan's name off the maintenance portal, not the silence on the other end of the line when I told my uncle how many buildings I had. Just my mother's hand on the table and those 7 words and the fact that she had always meant them.